So this week, I'm reading something a little bit different. This isn't a work of fiction. This is the holiday diary of Thomas Lott, which was written when he was just a teenager in 1815. Thomas Lott was my great 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 grandad, and he went to Kent here in the UK on a holiday and kept a diary. He'd apparently kept a previous diary from a previous trip, but that one is obviously lost to time at the moment. It may turn up at some point in the future, you never really know, but for now it's lost to time. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the original copy of the diary. It is in Canterbury, in a university there, and with everything that's happened with the world events, I've not been able to get over to Canterbury to see the original diary. But in the 1990s, a researcher transcribed the diary and wrote an article about the diary from a historical perspective. And so that means that I do have the images of all the diary pages that were shared in the article, and I've got the journal that the article was shared in. So I also have the transcribed diary itself. So that's what I'm going to be reading for you here. Obviously, if you find this interesting, then feel free to give it a thumbs up, leave any comments below, and if you want to hear more of me reading things on this channel, feel free to subscribe and let me know what kinds of things you'd like me to read. So this is the holiday diary of Thomas Lott, written when he was a teenager in 1815. An excursion to Deal, Dover and Canterbury, 1815. Thomas Lott. A journey to Dover, Deal and Canterbury, a sequel to the journey to Margate, will contain a description of all the different places adjacent: Canterbury Cathedral, Dover Castle, Sir Sidney Smith's seat there, etc., etc. We passed the top of St. Nicholas to here, and very little farther we had the sea on one side of us. When we passed St. Nicholas, we lost sight of it, and then we had the most beautiful prospects of woods, etc. We passed through Sarr, a very beautiful village, and also Up Street and Fordwich, which church steeple is very much like Birchington. We then came through Sturry. Its church steeple is a low one. From here we saw Canterbury Cathedral. Its steeple is like St. Saviour's or St. Andrew's or Westminster, 4 spires. We then came into the town, the streets of which are rather narrow, but there are some very handsome shops. We stopped and got out at the George and Dragon, and we had some refreshments. We heard that the Archbishop of Canterbury was confirming at the cathedral. We accordingly went there. There is a gateway that you go under, and then the cathedral suddenly presents itself to your view. It's a very handsome one, and built somewhat similar to Westminster Abbey. We entered the church at the west door, opposite which the organ is, though the chief steeple is on the middle of the church roof. It has a most beautiful and sweet-toned organ. The inside of the choir resembles Westminster also. The rope which pulls Bell Harry, a bell at the top of the church, which they toll for prayers but never ring, save on the death of any of the royal family, is just close to the organ. We saw the service and confirmation. The Archbishop was there. We then went home, and dined for the first time at an ordinary at the inn. After dinner, we went to the sexton and went all over the cathedral, saw the Black Prince's tomb, sword, helmet, etc., one of the King Henry's. We saw a number of bishops' tombs, the place where Becket's tomb was, with the stone worn out by the pilgrim's knees. One bishop's, where the tomb represented him at the top in the full health, at the bottom dead. We then went into a small place close to the organ, in which was the altar where Becket was murdered, but now it is removed. There is the stone from which was taken a small part with the blood of Becket on it, and sent as a relic to some archbishop. We went into the dark cloisters under the cathedral, and saw the French church. We went into the cloisters above. Everything here is very nice and clean, and in capital repair. We went into the chapter house, etc., into 2 or 3 chapels, but did not go up to the top of the cathedral. We then went to the Kent and Canterbury Hospital and drank tea with Mrs. Batka. The hospital is a fine large building. Behind there is a mill to work water to the top of their house. After tea, Mrs. Batka took a walk with us to Mrs. Baker's. She is in a very miserable state, and will take no comfort. All with her is money. She will hardly give herself any comfort or food, but they are obliged to buy it unknown to her and give it to her as a present. Ah, Mrs. Lott, we're all in a bad way. What will become of us? We had not been there long when in came William Marsh, who had come down by the Margate packet, and not finding us there, had come to Canterbury. We all took a walk to a mount thrown up by the Danes in one night, called the Dungill, from the word Dean John. There are walks all the way up to the top, and at the top there's a small monument. This was done by some nobleman. We then went home to bed and slept well. Thursday, 13th of July, 1815. We took a walk to the deanery before breakfast, and saw Mary March, the sister, who is a nice, lively young girl. We saw the Archbishop and Bishop of Exeter get into their carriage and set off for Dover. We went after breakfast to Sturry, the village in which father was born, and had dinner with Mrs. Kitchingham, Marsh's mother. We went into the house of our grandfather opposite, ground my knife there, visited some of the neighbours there who remembered father, went to Sturry Church, saw grandfather's tomb and Mr. Marsh's, set the bells ringing. We saw also Uncle Robert Lott and his daughter Betsy. We took a walk after dinner to Mr. Allen's farm, whom M. knew, and had tea there as Westbeer. Mr. Allen treated us very kindly. We went all over the farm and the large garden, at the end of which there is an arbour of pictures. We had tea of him, brown and white bread, tongue, etc. William Marsh then took William and I to Fordwich, a very small village to the left of Westbeer, and we went to see James, a little boy whom William had got a ship for, and we went to see James's brother to give us a young bird, but he was not at home. There is a small river running through the village. We saw a young hawk at his house. We then walked back to Sturry, and from there in a chaise to Canterbury. We did not feel very tired on our going back. Friday 14th July. We stayed at home before breakfast, and after William tried to get a return chase for us. There are a great many churches in Canterbury, and the market is a nice little place. We also went to see at the school William Marsh's old schoolmaster, who was very glad to see him. We went also to bid Aunt Baker adieu. Mary Marsh made us presents before we went away. We at last, after much difficulty, got a return chase when one of the horses was taken ill. We went in the meantime to the Shakespeare and waited there some time. The landlady lived at Mrs. Seagood's some time. We at last got the chase and set off at 3 o'clock for Dover. A sailor was with us. The country from Canterbury to Dover is very pleasant. We passed through the villages of Breach and Word, and saw their churches. The halfway house is a very nice new house. We came up the hills, which about here are very steep. We got into Dover about 6 o'clock, and lodged at the Wellington, a very nice house, and very civil inhabitants. We had tea, and then took a nice walk on the beach after tea, and heard the band play. We then went home, and having had a very nice lamb chop for supper, we went to bed in 2 very nice rooms with comfortable beds. The cliff on the top of which the castle is built is a very grand and majestic one. It was a very foggy evening this evening. Dover lies in a hollow. There is a very great height on the left of it. Opposite to us were the barracks, on which was a bell to call the men to work. Saturday 15th July 1815. I took a walk before breakfast over a small river, at the back of the house by the harbour, and saw the ships building and all the different works going forward. After breakfast, Mother went to Mr. Peter Watts, Aunt Riley's uncle. We then proceeded to view Dover Castle. We went up every steep hill with steps. Old Brown was the guide. The men confined in the castle have put a box for charity with 2 poles on which are fixed bells, which they continually keep pulling on, seeing anybody come by. He shewed us the barracks, their bakehouse, the cannons, and also Queen Anne's pocket pistol. A large brass cannon 24 feet long, with inscriptions on it in High Dutch. The barracks for the soldiers are cut out in the cliff, with holes at the top for air. We then went into one of the rooms, and Mr. Brown, having left us a woman, shewed us it. We saw the horn which called the men to work on the building of the castle, a Roman sword, old snuffers, etc., etc., etc. In one of the rooms, the guns are piled up in great order. The wind up here is very strong and boisterous. We then went home, and after dinner took a walk to Smith's Folly, one of 6 Sidney Smith's seats, the top of which are built in the shape of boats. It has a small tower. We went into it, and the woman showed us all over. One room in the round tower is built exactly like a tent, with cloth round about it. In the hall are models of battle axes, armour, etc., to have been sent to France. Real helmets, shields. We then took a walk on the beach. The bathing machines here are pushed in the water instead of being drawn by horses, and the backs do not let down as the others. There are only 2 of them. I then took a walk on the pier, which branches out in 2 forms, and forms a very safe harbour. Part of it is built with stone, the other part with wood. There are 2 churches only in Dover, one a rather handsome one and the other not so much. Both the churchyards are enclosed, so that you cannot walk through them. We then, having had some tea, and having ordered Mr. Rowland's conveyance, we set off in it at 6 o'clock for Deal. Sunday 16th July 1815. In Mr. Rowland's caravan we were not very comfortable, as there were too many in it, and we could not see much of the country, except that it was very open. We got into Deal by 8 o'clock, and Mrs. Rowland got us nice lodgings in Farrier Street, at a very respectable house. Mrs. Newby's a room as large as the dining room and 2 bedrooms, being quite comfortable. Mother took a walk to Mr. Ralph's, the butcher, and they, not knowing her, asked for a quarter lamb to be sent to 37 Bow Lane, and then they knew her. I took a walk before breakfast to look about on the sea. The downs are opposite Deal. The beach here spreads a great way into the sea and is very comfortable for bathing. Mr. Howard called after breakfast with his son William, a nice young lad about 12 years old. We soon got acquainted and quite friendly together. We took a walk to Mr. Howard's, where we saw Mrs. Howard, a very nice, lively woman, and stayed there some time. William H. and I then took a walk to look at the chapel. It resembled Pentonville very much in building, has 1 bell, and will soon have an organ. We then went back, and I went to chapel with Mrs. and William Howard, Mother with the Ralphs. We had no sermon at the chapel, because of a funeral afterwards. A doctor was buried. We then went back to Mr. Ralph's to dinner. Saw there Mr. Harrison Ralph, a nice young man, and Miss Anna, who seems rather ingeny. We had dinner of lamb, beef, and nice currant pudding with beautiful cream. Mother went to chapel after dinner again, and I went to take a walk. The market-place here is under the town hall. The machines for bathing here resemble Dover, only they have got railings all round the bath to keep you from being drowned. I think the town of Deal is nearly as large as Dover. I then returned and had tea at Mrs. Ralph's. William and I went with Joseph to try and get a bird's nest. Mr. Williams, who keeps the mill, came to tea with Mr. John Ralph. We all after tea took a walk by the hospital to the barracks, and heard the band play. Mary and Eliza Howard are quite old friends, as well as William and Joseph Howard. We then returned to Mrs. Ralph's and had some syllabub, which they are very famous for down here, with ham tongue. We then went home and to bed. Monday, July 17th. Before breakfast, we took a walk to Mr. Williams' mill over the fields. It's a very nice, large one, built like the Margate mills. The sweeps not coming near the ground. We saw Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Ralph's daughter, Mrs. Howard's nephew. Mr. Marsh came after breakfast from Sturry. We spent the whole day at Mrs. Howard's. Mr. Howard had got 4 or 5 different warehouses, so that we had good fun in them, and found plenty of old clock bells to amuse us. William Marsh went with William Howard and I and we had very nice bathing in the open sea, much better than in the machines, though it was a rough sea. William Marsh and I then had a pipe, and we had tea, and afterwards some very good fun at dancing, singing, etc. All the family were there. After all was done, Syllabub drank, etc., etc. We all sang, God Save the King, and between every verse, by the way of relaxation from the fatigue, had a jig round the table. The company then dispersing, we all went to bed. Tuesday, July 18th, 1815. Bathed in the sea before breakfast. Stayed at home, writing a letter to father afterwards, and then went to dinner at Mr. John Ralph, the butcher's. Mrs. Ralph is a very nice, good-tempered young woman. After dinner, William Marsh and I took a pipe and walked about, and then had tea there. Their house is exactly opposite the market, and very nice one it is. After tea, we all assembled, except the Howards, and went to play. Deal Theatre is a very small house, built in a square manner. Jane Shore was acted very well. Mr. Montgomery and Miss Fitzhenry were the two best actors. Jane Shore was rather overdone. The bill said the lawyer was to be acted, but Gloucester came forward to say they could get no book and would substitute the purse or benevolent tar, which was acted very well. A pantomime came next, but I, being close, saw all the tricks. They had about 6 scenes to it all. We then went home, and very soberly to bed. I forgot to mention that before we went to play, we went to Deal Castle, a very nice, large one, with excellent rooms and furniture. I bought a wafer from there, and also ground my knife on a stone there, pulled the alarm bell. We went on the battlements, and climbed up the ladders to the towers, etc. A woman showed it to us. Wednesday, July 19th. A very wet morning. We went to bathe, notwithstanding, and felt rather funny with a few drops of rain coming upon us. I never feel more comfortable than when I've just come out of the sea and got my clothes on. I forgot to mention that one of the bands sang O Nancy at Deal Theatre very well, and also that Mr. Trott, the bather, thought he could sing so well that he could please the people, but, however, he was hissed pretty well. We dined today at Mrs. Howard's, and afterwards, not being able to go out much, amused ourselves in raising and fixing a bell in the church manor in Mr. Howard's warehouse. William Marsh held on. We then went to tea at Mrs. Williams. Went again all over the mill. There are plenty of grasshoppers here, as long as your finger. We had tea. The family of the ladies all were here. We had dancing, syllabub, etc., etc., etc. Mr. Williams has got a very nice little model of his mill in the front garden, which blows round with the wind. In his large mill there are 2 large stones which grind the corn and are very dangerous to go near, as are also the sweeps. Mr. Williams is a very fine large house, though rather old and worm-eaten. We came home about 9 and went to bed. Thursday, July 20th. Got up, but did not bathe, as it was rather too wet. Breakfasted at Mrs. Howard's. She made William and I a present of a pencil case, heaping on us cakes, eggs, baskets, etc. We took a place in the Deal coach, and it called for us at 9. We set off, Mrs. Howard, the Ralphs, etc., etc., coming to bid us good-bye. We took leave of them all, and also of Deal. Mrs. Howard intended to pay us a visit in London very soon. We got on the outside of the coach, and William Howard, Joseph, and Jack went with us a little way. We passed by Deal Church, a pretty old church. We had the sea mostly on our right hand. The country about here is very open, plenty of corn. We stopped some time at Sandwich, a very pretty little place with a nice large church. Just out of the village is a pretty little river, and farther on are the salt pits, square places in which they make salt. Just as we got to Ramsgate, it began to rain very hard, and an ill-natured accident, I shall forbear to mention, quite spoiled my hat. We got inside soon, and out of the way of it. We passed through Broadstairs. A lady in the caravan was going to Mr. Fromm's Broadstairs. We had last beheld Margate again after a week's absence, and on going to Mrs. Doughty's, found her lodgings well hired. However, we left our lodgings there and went and had some dinner. Savilaw, etc., William and I took a walk about and got our luggage on board the Duke of Kent, and asked to sleep on board. After dinner, I took a walk with Marsh about Margate on the sands, but we could not find a place to bathe well. We then had supper at Mrs. Doty's, the lodgers being gone out, and then went to sleep on board. The cabins were shut, but William found his way down, and we all slept comfortably, except Mother. Friday, July 21st. After having had a very pleasant and comfortable night's rest, and found a place to bathe, but there were plenty of holes to fall in, and not near so comfortable as at Deal. We had breakfast at Mrs. Doty's. We then went on board, where there were some passengers who came down with us. We bade William good-bye. They began to haul off, and we left Margate. We felt rather funny at first, but when we had got out a little way, we were as calm as in the river. I bought a boat, which I swam behind the packet. We had 2 Frenchmen on board, who were very good-tempered and pleasant, and I talked to them in French. We set out at about 10 o'clock, and had plenty of fun, passed the Nore at 7 in the evening. Towards night, the Frenchmen being merry, we had plenty of singing and dancing, so that I, who had gone to bed, could not sleep. I got up on deck between 1 and 2 o'clock, the moon being out. It was beautifully pleasant. I then went down and slept till about 6 in the morning, when I got up. We were then at anchor. We had passed Gravesend. Saturday, July 22nd. We had a nice breeze up the river, and met the steam yacht, which had set off yesterday at 8 on its passage down at Woolwich. We saw at Wapping the old Gravesend steamboat. We got to Wapping by 1 o'clock, and soon got safe to Billingsgate, where, after a deal of bother in landing and getting the boxes out, we at length got safe to Bow Lane, where, to our great joy, we found father, grandmother, and Touch in good health, and thus ended and finished our journey to Margate.